Welcome back everyone. Today we're making a sling bag, and this bag measures in at 15 by 10 with a 3.5 inch depth. And this is a remake of a previous bag. We added more pockets and we also went into detail on each step. And also this bag is on the easier side to make, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to download the PDF pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need 3/4 yard for your main fabric, and you can pretty much use any style of fabric for this bag. I'm actually going to be using a denim for this entire bag. I found that denim is a great fabric to use and it's very easy to find. But like always, get creative with it and use whatever fabric that really brings out your design. You'll need 3/4 yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be for the lining on the inside of the bag. I'm going to be using a nylon. I use this in a lot of the videos for linings. It's just an all-around great fabric. It's durable and it looks good on the inside of the bag. You'll need one 20-inch zipper. This is going to be used for the main pocket. It's a little bit more than the actual opening, but we're going to be snipping the ends after we sew it on. And we'll get more into that once we start making the bag. You'll need 2 yards of 1-inch width webbing. This is going to be used for the straps and the loops up front. The loops up front are optional, so if you're just going to be using it for the strap, you can get away with 1 yard. And going along with that webbing, you'll need some hardware. You'll need 1 buckle, 2 D-rings, 1 lobster clasp, and 1 strap adjuster. And all this hardware needs to be 1-inch width because we're working with 1-inch width webbing. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape the pages together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting.
And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. If the printer is aligned, the pages should line up perfectly, and from here we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. Once you cut out all the panels, you should end up with 4 bottom strap panels cut out of your main fabric, 2 strap panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric, and 1 cut out of your main fabric. And before you cut this panel, you're going to want to determine whether you're going to bias tape or you're going to sew these panels together. If you're not sure, you can set this one off to the side and we'll get more into it later on. I'm also going to be using a mesh padded fabric for my secondary fabric. This will provide a little bit more padding on my shoulder. 2 side main panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front inside panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front top pocket panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front buckle panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. In this panel, it's optional to use a secondary fabric. You can actually use the main fabric for both layers. Fortunately, my main fabric is fairly thin, so I'm going to use it for both layers. 2 pocket divider panels, both cut out of your secondary fabric. And lastly, 2 back main panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. Moving on to construction, we're going to start by grabbing the front buckle panels, separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, and again, I'm going to be using a main fabric for both my layers, so I'm going to be placing the secondary fabric off to the side, and I'm going to do the same thing for one of my main panels, so we're only going to be working with 1 main panel. Using the pattern, locate the webbing placement guides, and this is optional. We're going to be adding webbing loops on the front, so cut your webbing strips to match the length shown on the panel, and then we're going to start placing these out using the placement guides. And if you prefer chalking these guides out onto your fabric, you can do that too. I like to kind of eyeball it, and then once I get all of them on, I can make corrections from there. And before we keep going, I want to quickly show that you don't have to add these loops. These are optional. You can switch it up, add a zipper pocket, a flat pocket, or any style pocket up front. It really comes down to what style of pocket you'd use most on the front of this bag. But anyways, moving on, we're going to grab a 4-inch strip of webbing and our buckle. We'll be feeding the webbing to the side of the buckle that has 1 opening. If yours has 2 on both sides, that's totally fine. Just pick one of the sides, feed your webbing through. And using the pattern again, we're going to place it at the top of the panel. Make sure the buckle side is facing down towards the right side of the fabric. And real quick, this is another spot you can add a custom closure. If you don't like the buckle, you can actually extend that front end all the way up and add a button at the top on the strap. This would eliminate the use for a buckle and it would extend that fabric all the way up the strap. And if you'd prefer doing it this way, all you have to do is extend that top about 5 to 6 inches, keeping the width, and don't add the buckle and webbing. But anyways, I'm going to keep going with the buckle method. I just wanted to show you that there are other options if you don't like the buckle up top, and it's very easy to modify this pattern to work for you. Getting back on track, we're going to sew 3 stitches on each one of our loops, and then we're going to sew as close as we can to the top edge, securing the buckle down. For the loops, I'm going to be sewing on the outside edge and then directly in the center. This will create 2 openings per section that I can clip things to. If you want to add more loops, you can totally do that. And that's simply done by adding more tack stitches. From here, we can grab the panel we set off to the side, and we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the outside edge. Once you have the panels lined up, we're going to stitch just the top section at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving the bottom section unstitched. And on this stitch, I like to sew directly through the corners and start a new stitch. After stitching, flip the right sides out, line up the outside edges, and place a few pins to keep everything secured together, and then from here, we're going to add a top stitch along that top edge. With the top stitch complete, double check your work, make sure it's looking nice because this stitch will be front and center, and then from here, we're going to grab the front inside panels, place the panels together with wrong sides facing, make sure they're lined up perfectly, place a few pins, and then we're going to add the front buckle assembly directly on top on the right side with right sides facing up. Line up both panel sets, add a few pins, and then we're going to stitch the outside edge at the sides and the bottom. And we're just doing a few tack stitches to secure all these layers together. And by doing this, it'll make it easier in future steps once we add the side panel. And this will become our new front assembly, and for the moment, it is totally complete, so we can place it off to the side. And grab the front and top pocket panels. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, locate the inside curved edge on the pattern, and this is where we're going to be placing our zipper. I'm going to be using a 20-inch zipper. This is longer than the actual curve because we're going to be sewing it on and then snipping the ends. Place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric, and the right side of the secondary fabric on the opposite side, sandwiching the zipper in between both of the panels. Since this is a hard curve, you're going to want to keep moving it, adding pins, and going along that edge. Once you reach the opposite side, double check to make sure both the secondary and main fabric are lined up, then we're going to stitch that zipper edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, double check both sides, make sure all the layers got stitched together, and then we're going to flip the wrong sides together. Pull the panels away from the zipper, lining up the outside edge, and add a few pins. And it's very important that this outside edge is lined up perfectly. Once you have it lined up and pinned down, we're going to add a top stitch along that zipper edge. Take your time and try to make it as neat as possible. And a quick tip, try matching your thread color to your fabric color to hide any imperfections. Slide this panel forward and grab your side main panels. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, locate the side placement guides, and we're going to be attaching those sides to the sides of the zipper assembly. Place the right sides together, sandwiching the zipper assembly in between both of the side panels, and we're going to do the same thing for the opposite side, lining up the side edges. And if your zipper train is on the outside of the panels, make sure you zip it towards the center of the zipper panel. And from here, stitch both sides directly over the zipper at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. With the stitch complete, we're going to flip the right sides out, pull the side panels away from the zipper assembly, and we're going to add a top stitch to both sides. After finishing up the top stitch, double check your work, make sure everything is looking good, and from here, we're going to go towards the inside and snip our zipper ends flush with the seam allowance. And this will become our new side panel assembly. It's totally complete, and for the moment, we can place it off to the side and grab our bottom strap panels. Separate each of the panels, and using the pattern, we're going to locate the webbing placement guide. And this is where we're going to be placing our webbing. We're going to be using 2 strips of 3-inch webbing with 2 D-rings. Feed the webbing through the D-rings, and then we're going to place them directly on top of the panel on the webbing placement guide. Make sure you're far enough away from the bottom edge so you don't enter that seam allowance. Grab the opposite panel, place it directly over top with right sides together, and then we're going to stitch just the side and bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if you want, you can go back and forth over the webbing area a few times to really lock that webbing into position. Double check all the layers and pull the right sides out. If you're having issues with the corner, you can use a pair of scissors to poke it out. Or if your fabric is bulky, you can trim that corner on a diagonal to get rid of some of that bulk. This should help that corner be a little bit more square. Place a few pins to keep the layers lined up, and then we're going to add a top stitch on the outside edge. And again, feel free to go over that webbing a few times to really lock it down. After finishing up the top stitch, double check, make sure everything is looking good, and that's going to complete our bottom strap loops. So we can go ahead and place these off to the side and grab our strap panels. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, and again, I'm going to be using this mesh padded fabric for my secondary fabric. This will be resting on your shoulder, so having that little extra pad goes a long way. The second thing you have to determine is whether you're going to use bias tape or you're just going to sew these panels together. If you're using the bias tape technique, you'll be cutting on the dash line, and this is how it's going to turn out. You're going to bias tape all the way around that outside edge with the wrong sides together. And it really comes down to preference and whether you have a bias tape attachment or not. I will be covering how to bias tape in future steps, so if you want to put this off to the side and skip ahead, you can do that too. But for now, we're going to place the right side together and stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving that top edge unstitched. After finishing up the stitch, do a quick once around, make sure all the layers got stitched together, and from here we're going to flip the right sides out. Just like in previous steps, we're going to line up the outside edges, place a few pins, and add a top stitch all the way around that outside edge. For the best results when it comes to adding a top stitch, I recommend using an edge presser foot. And that's going to complete the strap panel, and again, I'm going to bring out the second one so you can have a look side by side. I typically go the bias tape route, but for this bag, I just wanted to show you there's a different way of doing it. It does take a little bit longer, but it still yields a great result. But anyways, it really comes down to preference and what tools you have to work with. But for now, we can place these off to the side and grab the pocket divider panels. Separate the panels, and using the pattern, we're going to locate the top edge. This is the edge we're going to be stitching, so we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the outside edge, and stitch that top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, flip the wrong sides together, and just like in previous steps, we're going to line up the bottom edge, the top edge, place a few pins, and add a top stitch. And once you finish your top stitch, that's going to complete this inside pocket divider panel, and for the moment, we can place it off to the side and grab the back main panels. Separate the secondary fabric from the main fabric, and again, we're going to be placing the wrong sides together and place it under the main fabric. Add a few pins to prevent the layers from shifting around. Using the pattern, locate both of the strap placement guides, and we're going to start with the bottom straps. These are the straps with the D-rings, and we're going to be placing these on the bottom side edges. And you're going to want to let them hang off the edge about a 1/4 inch. Next, grab the complete strap panel and place it directly in the center at the top edge. And again, we're letting it hang off that edge about a 1/4 inch or more. And then sew them down by stitching as close as you can to the outside edge. And this is mainly to get everything into position so it's easier to add the side panel. And from here, we're going to flip it to the opposite side, grab the complete pocket divider panel, and we're going to place it on the bottom edge. And we're going to stitch it down just like we did the front inside panel. We're going to stitch the outside edges and then a tack stitch at the bottom. And once you have the pocket divider attached, that's going to complete the entire back panel. So now we're ready to add the side panel. And if you are wondering about completing the main strap, we're actually going to be adding that afterwards, so it doesn't get in the way as we're adding the side panel. So place this panel off to the side, and we're going to start by adding the side panel to our front assembly. Mark the centers at the top and the bottom. Grab the complete side panels, open it up, and we're going to mark the centers at the top and bottom on both sides of the assembly. Place the right sides together with the zipper side at the top edge of our front panel assembly. I find it's easiest to place a pin at the center top and center bottom, and then filling in the outside edges from there. And once you have that complete, we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is the hardest stitch, so take your time as you're sewing. Before we move on, it's best to flip the right sides out, double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, we can pop the wrong sides back out and grab the complete back assembly. Mark the centers at the top and the bottom, just like we did in the previous step, and we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the top and bottom centers. Place as many pins as needed, and then we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, take your time with the stitch. If it's not lining up at the end, you're going to want to de-thread and try again. Just like before, we're going to want to flip the right sides out, double check, make sure all the layers got stitched together, because it's super easy to go back, add a quick stitch if anything is left out. Before we move on, we're going to flip the wrong sides back out, and we're going to clean up that raw edge. Before we get to that, we're going to trim all the outside edges flush with the seam allowance, because we're going to be adding bias tape and we don't want anything sticking out past the seam allowance or it's going to get caught in our bias tape. But anyways, I'm going to walk you through a few different techniques on how to add the bias tape, whether you're a pro or beginner. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. and you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. And I'm using the bias tape attachment. This is a great way to go if you plan on making a lot of bags. It speeds up the process and gives you a professional finish. I also find when you add the bias tape, it really pokes those corners out and makes the bag overall more durable and look a lot nicer. But anyways, moving on to the next step, we're going to complete the second half of the buckle by adding webbing to the opposite side. Lay the bag out flat with right sides facing up, feed the webbing into the opposite side of the buckle from the inside back to the outside. Trim the webbing to your desired length. I'm just having mine go up the strap a little bit, and we're going to fold each side of the webbing over once so it doesn't slip back through the buckle. And before I do the opposite side, I'm going to add a lobster clasp. This will just give me a touch more functionality on my strap. Keep in mind, you don't want to make this too small because once you open it up, if you add a water bottle on that inside pocket, you want enough room for your strap to reconnect at the top. Once you're satisfied with the length, we're going to tack stitch each of the webbing ends down. And if you do plan on adding a water bottle, I recommend testing it out because you can always dethread that top section and add more webbing. And you can also add different hardware at the top other than a lobster clasp. You can add a D-ring, another webbing loop, or you can even extend that webbing all the way down the strap for an added look. But anyways, moving on, we're going to grab a 1 yard strip of webbing, and I recommend starting at least a 1 yard. Most of the strap is going to be made up in the main strap, so you may not need a full 1 yard, but you can always trim it down after you try it on. Grab one end of the webbing, fold it over once, and place it at the bottom of the strap. And on the opposite end of the webbing, we're going to add a strap slider and a lobster clasp. So we're going to first slide the strap slider on and move it down about 1 foot. Then feed the webbing through the clasp, and we're going to take that webbing end, pull a little bit of slack through the strap adjuster, feed that webbing end through the bottom side of the strap adjuster, and pull it out about 4 inches. Pull the slack back through the strap adjuster, giving yourself enough room, fold the end over once, and pin it down. And from here, we're going to add a tack stitch to both sides. For the top side, we're going to add a double tack stitch. You can add a double or you can add a box, and for the bottom, we're just going to add 1 tack stitch. Keep in mind this is the strap, so it will take a lot of strain, so the more stitches you add, the stronger it will be. From here, slide the strap adjuster to your size, try it on, and if you need to trim it down, you can totally do so. You can also clip it to either side of the bag, so whatever feels more comfortable for you, clip it to that side. And for the final step, we're going to be adding branding and zipper pulls. I'm just using a leather tab added with double-sided rivets. This is a super simple way to go, and you can also utilize it as extra loops. And the fun thing about this pattern is that you can actually customize the size by making it wider, taller, or pretty much to any size measurement that works best for you. And the same goes for the front panel. You can swap those loops out for a pocket, a zipper pocket, a flat pocket, or even a custom water bottle pocket. It's super easy to customize, and I hope you have some fun with it.
And there you have it, your sling bag is complete. Hopefully yours turned out great and the steps were a little bit easier to follow. Like always, it might take a few tries to really perfect these designs and also making the correct adjustments to your machine to work with your fabric. But like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.